Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another edition of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, your host today, editor of Native News Online. And this year, we have the presidential election, and I think people, if you're alive, you've probably been seeing it all over the news. And so Native News Online tends to do a really great job of covering the election. We have two experts in elections with us today, and we have OJ Semans out of Four Directions Native Vote. He's the co-director, founder of Four Directions. Welcome, OJ.
Oh, Bidaské, we chose on you. Wish you health and help, and thank you for having me on again.
Okay, and then we have Dallin Maybee. He is a friend who I've known when he was in the arts world back down at Santa Fe, and he's a assistant director of development, I believe, at the Native American Rights Fund. And just 2 weeks ago, I was in Anaheim, California, and I was at the Indian Gaming Association convention, and both OJ and Dallin were on a panel, which I was really impressed with, and they had some really good conversation going in terms of the upcoming elections. And so we want to talk about that today, gentlemen. So thank you, Chi McWitch, for coming on. And during that panel discussion out in Anaheim, I heard 3 or 4 times that this is the most important election. Now, we've been hearing that the last couple election cycles. Each of you, if you don't mind, OJ, you start. Tell me why this one is critical.
Well, it's critical because of the headway that we've made. We have, like I said, we're resilient. We're coming out 100 years anniversary, and people don't realize that even after we received our citizenship, that they had plans in the work to keep and suppress the Native vote from the very beginning. And it's always been for profit. The people like the Public Utilities Commission, the people in HUD, housing, different organizations, these are people that were, in PUC were elected by the citizens. The cabinet members are put in there by the president who was elected. To give you an example of why, again, is that if you look back even 50 years, whatever reservation you're on, you're going to find that they were able to set up telecommunications companies within our reservation. They were able to set up the utilities companies that provide our electricity. And each and every time, it was almost like predatory. They got to dictate the prices. They didn't have to get right-of-ways. They were able to basically have a monopoly on the reservation, shutting Indians out. And this was done through elected officials. Now, what happened in 2020 is Native Americans lit that spark, and it went all the way across Indian country, and we had the highest turnout ever. And we know for a fact that in the key states that what was happening in 2020, Native Americans' vote made the difference of who got elected. And from that, we were able to get Secretary Holland, a Native, in charge of the Interior. And if you remember, Interior used to be the War Department. So we actually have a Navy overseeing the War Department. So there's so many things that we have seen. But if you look at the bills that the tribes have to incur, helping with social programs, helping with telephones, telecommunications, internet, helping with electricity, keeping, fires burning, putting food on the table. All of this was made more difficult because the fact is that we were not able to participate in the vote fully. Therefore, these elected officials were able to take advantage of that and make it harder for tribal governments and tribal members to actually create businesses, to have the utility companies, to have the telecommunication companies. And so this If we sit back and do nothing, we're going to kick ourselves back another 50 years again. For all the progress that we made, we're going to lose it. And so every vote counts. I mean, you heard the famous phone call where all they need is 11,300 some odd votes. There's more Indians than that, even though the United States don't think that. And so we need to make sure that every voting age population native is registered and participates. And I always say this is a different kind of war. This is a war where you use a pen and you're able to take and change the direction, not only for Indian country, but actually for the United States and the world. So, I mean, this is a very, very important election.
Thank you, OJ, for that. And Dallin, why don't you weigh in? Why do you feel this is like the most important election?
Well, I think we've seen a trajectory, as OJ mentioned, of not just participation, but representation. Nobody understands the challenges unique to Indian country and to our communities better than people who come from our communities. There's a reason why there's a very highly organized effort to diminish our vote because they don't want these interests expressed. They want things to stay as they are. And we're fighting paradigms. Thankfully, the internet has allowed for an accessibility of information like nobody has ever believed. And despite our infrastructure efforts, cell phones have become an incredible tool to provide information to our communities and hopefully drive this momentum to not only participation, but to representation. There was very much a paradigm in Indian country that somehow our participation in these elections were a colonizer's effort to assimilate us, when that's just not simply the case. It's actually the opposite. When we participate, we get representatives who can help us further our culture, evolve our identity, and maintain our traditions. I think efforts, and this effort is ongoing. Right now, we've had significant victories in North Dakota with some of our litigation against Benson County, despite litigation 20 years ago that told them they can't keep these mechanisms in place. They sought to not only reiterate and double down on those mechanisms, but redistrict areas and counties that diminished the collective Native vote. And despite those redistricting efforts, the courts came back and said, no, this is absolutely a defiant act from what had happened 20 years ago. You guys can't keep these districts in place. And what was the result? We have 2 and 3 different representatives who are from the communities. It was an astounding victory and one that these efforts, unfortunately, keep circling back around every 10, 20 years. They'll keep at it. So we've got to be vigilant. We've got to participate if we want to keep our cultures alive.
I really like how you say it. Participation translates to representation, and certainly having representation at whether it's state level, federal level, you're really pushing the Native causes. And so I was actually on a program, I think 4 years ago, and someone asked me, well, how can you vote in the white man's election? And I said, well, as a dual citizen, I vote in both my tribal election and the federal or regular election. I said, and certainly if I'm going to pay taxes to the IRS, I'm going to participate if I have that right to vote. So we don't really have much choice on that. And the good news, I'm Prairie Band Potawatomi. We don't have taxes. I do pay tax to the U.S. government, so I'm going to vote. So that's my quick answer. Hey, OJ, 4 directions I want to say 4 years ago, deemed, and I'll read the states: Arizona, Colorado, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, North Carolina, and Wisconsin as 7 states that can really be the tipping point or make the difference in terms of Native vote in general elections. And I think we certainly saw that in the last senatorial election out in Nevada, right? I mean, the Native vote really helped make a difference. And you could argue Wisconsin and Arizona, I think you've already alluded to it, really made a difference in the 2020 election. Are those the same 7 states? Are there other states you're adding to the list, or where are we this cycle?
We're exactly where we are in 2020. Um, and again, what we're looking at is the Native voting population is equal to or greater than what the candidates won by before. And so it makes a real big difference that we have those that are natives that are of the voting age population participate. And we have younger and younger people out there. And so right now, unfortunately, we can't do everything, but, we are looking at working in Wisconsin. We are looking at working in Nevada. We are looking at working in Arizona. We're looking at doing a big voter registration drive in Montana because over the years after Four Directions left there, the actual registration of Native Americans just dropped tremendously. So we need to go back up there. And you got to remember, in all of these states, it's not only for the president, it's for the U.S. Senate, it's for the U.S. House, but even more importantly, it's for the school board members. It's for the water commission. It's for the county commissioners. It's for everything. I always call the county election officials the first line of defense, because they're the ones that are really trying the hardest to keep the native vote down, because they do not want natives within these school boards, these county commissions. So it's always good to be able to participate in that presidential election, but we still need to make sure that we're able to get education there for our kids with our history in it. And we haven't been able to, but I'm hoping 2024 is going to be able to change that so we can start teaching our history back into these schools.
You bring up a good point. I was part of I listened to a panel up in Michigan, it's on education, and so I recall off the top of my head, there were 4 women, Native women, who are on school boards, and they were just talking about what a difference it's made. And a lot of people don't realize this, but some of the things, as you just mentioned, history being taught, the curriculum type issues are right at that local school board level. So I really appreciate what you said. If we're going to make a difference, you got to stepping stone, and you can start right there at the local school board and work your way up all the way to president. As we said, as you mentioned, he nominated Deb Haaland to be the Secretary of the Interior. Dallin, NARF has done tremendous work along with OJ's group, overcoming the voter suppression. And there's been several cases. You mentioned the North Dakota. I think Montana, there was a nice court ruling recently that had to deal with drop off where people can pick up votes, ballots, or what have you. And hey, talk about what you see as some of the critical issues still going on here in 2024 with potential suppression of the native vote.
Well, and that's the danger of having census issues and results so close to elections like this, because then you see legislatures actively working to suppress that vote through very onerous voter suppression type laws, everything from certain types of identification to ballot collection to just simply polling places. The nuts and bolts of what you see during election years are very active even today. Despite things like the Voting Rights Act working to ensure, and that's what most of our litigation is based on, these violations of the Voting Rights Act. And there's a piece of native legislation that we're advocating for called the Native American Voting Rights Act that would ensure some of these unique challenges are protected. And so, in Arizona, we have everything from, well, like you said, in Montana, we have things like the polling place in Indian country, so people don't have to drive 60, 80 miles in one direction to actually participate in the process. Ballot collection in rural areas, things that might seem on their face okay in a lot of areas to ensure fair elections, But A, there hasn't been any real voter fraud in those types of things. And B, when it comes to our tribal communities, where many of them are extremely rural, people can't take 3 hours out of their day to go simply participate to vote, or they don't want a sheriff breathing down their neck as they walk through the door. Those are real issues. That intimidation.
That's intimidation, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And OJ has very specific instances of that type of thing occurring. But in other areas, it's simply not having addresses on the reservation. When you have a voter ID law that requires a physical address on the ID to match up with the voter, just makes no sense. It absolutely precludes only our communities. And when you have a vote being decided by 500 or 1,000 people, and there's 2,000, 3,000 voting age natives who could absolutely make a difference, that's a big deal. And those guys are very sophisticated and aware of those numbers and know what they need to do in order to preclude us.
OJ, give us some of those. For instance, you had a really good success the last election cycle, actually the mid-year out in Nevada, in one of the counties where you guys, Forward Directions, brought suit, right? And it had to do with same-day voting on the reservation. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was in Elko, Nevada, and it was a Duck Valley Indian Reservation. What it was is, in order for them to vote, if they wanted to vote early, they would have to drive about 2.5 hours through very bad roads. And we, working with the tribe, filed a lawsuit under the state constitution. And we weren't able to get everything. And I think we talked about this last time I was there. We weren't able to get everything, but we were able to get them some early voting. The way they had it, their voting would have finished on a Thursday, a week before the actual election, and they would have had one day. We were able to get them early voting for a few days and have voting on election day in person and drop boxes. And even then, with the judge and the order, they have this in Nevada. They call it the constitutional sheriffs. And under the law, the sheriff's supposed to, pick up the ballot box and deliver it. They wouldn't do it. They said they don't have to follow state law. They're constitutional sheriffs, and they refused to pick up the ballot boxes in Duck Valley. We actually had to work with the Secretary of State, and we had to get the Nevada Highway Patrol to pick up the ballot boxes. First time in Nevada history where the Highway Patrol actually, participated, but we forced them to do it. And one of the cool things about this, we didn't get all we wanted because it was such a short time frame. But in 2024, they're going to have full-fledged in-person satellite office that mirrors that in Elko. So that means they're going to get the same amount of days, the same amount of hours in which to participate, where they can early vote and vote on election day. And what's so cool about that is in 2024, that's when we were given our citizenship. So I always tell people, you want to know resilience? Look at the Duck Valley tribe, 100 years on an anniversary in order for them to get equality at the ballot box. I mean, all of this is done on purpose. Don't think that there's not a reason behind it. It's because of the fact, like in Elko, they made a difference on the election of a U.S. senator. And if you look at different places, you'll find reservations surrounded by red, and the blues pop up. And again, we don't tell people how to vote, but what we want to do is educate them so that they do vote. And if you see the blue, it's because in that area, those are the individuals that are working with the tribes and the tribal members to help improve life on the reservation.
Mm-hmm. Now, thank both of you for what you're doing, because if you read and sometimes I'm astounded at the number of moves that state legislatures all over the country have done. And it was like, I mean, it's astounding numbers of measures they have put in to really prevent certain people, particularly Native Americans, from voting. It's just astounding. So Chimigwich, thank you for doing what you do. There's a theme out there right now that this election, democracy is really under threat. Dallin, do you see that? Do you see democracy is under threat during this election?
Absolutely. And that's a very complicated question as to how and why it's under threat. But anytime that you see efforts actively made to minimize or diminish people or communities' voice, that's a threat to democracy. When you allow corporate interests or any interests really to subvert the voice of not just the minority, but the majority, that's a threat to democracy. When you have outside external influences actively engaged in false narratives and fear mongering, that's an absolute threat to our democracy. And so, our efforts and OJ's as well are on behalf of tribal communities. Our interests will always come first, but our interests very often mirror the many communities that also surround our tribal communities. And so we are in a fight for our lives and our democracy. Absolutely.
OJ, what's your take on that?
We're going to be facing a lot of intimidation in 2024. They're even putting it on where, they've hired tens of thousands of poll workers that are going to be capable of challenging votes and to ensure that there's a fair election. In Indian country, I think you're going to see people that's never been on a reservation, or even worse, the white ranchers and farmers that are on reservations that don't like us anyway, to be more of poll watchers that are going to come and try to create intimidation. And I've seen it all. I've seen them where they put a sheriff at the polling place. I've seen it where they've had their operatives come in and take pictures of the elders to take and put signs that would make the elders feel uncomfortable. I mean, I think 2024 is going to be probably one of the worst times in Indian country when it comes to outsiders trying to influence or intimidate, especially our elders. And I think we talked about this too, is we talked about tribes having exclusionary laws. And in that, it's a civil action. But what you can do is that if a person is creating a problem within the reservation, the tribe has the civil authority to remove them. Now they'll get their day in court and then come back and have a hearing and stuff, but it removes the threat. And one of the things we're suggesting to tribes is look at their exclusionary law and then ensure that in there that outsiders that are not members of that tribe have to be respectful to our customs, our traditions, and especially towards our elders and our children, because that's where they're really going to come in on the hardest. And so I'm hoping tribes will take that into consideration and amend their exclusionary laws to ensure that we can protect our elders and our children during this election time.
Okay. Thank you. And I was impressed with some of the advice you put forward or some recommendations for tribes when you guys were in Anaheim on the panel, and talk about what tribal leaders can do to ensure that the native vote from their tribal communities get their vote out this year. What I think you mentioned vans, maybe transporting people. Talk about there's 2, 3, 4 things you guys mentioned. So if you could cover that real quickly, I'd really appreciate it.
Go for it, Dallin.
Well, a lot of it comes back to a report that was done a few years back on some of the significant challenges in Indian country. There was a ton of tribal leader interviews. There was congressional testimony. And it really comes down to tailoring for your community what your election needs are, which requires a little bit of legwork. You usually need a tribal election department that can kind of see not only what you need for your own, and most tribes have them, what you need for your own tribal elections, but as an extension of that, bring somebody in to kind of evaluate participation in state, local, and federal elections. Maybe you need to request a polling place in your community. Maybe you need ballot collection. Have some drives to set up voter registration. Make it an easy process. Ask your tribal council for some time off so that they can participate in not only federal elections, but state and local elections as well, because that representation is absolutely critical. So it really depends on assessing the needs of your community and then going from there. There's a lot of resources available. Four Directions is a great resource. They can kind of tell you, this is the steps that you got to take to implement some of these things in your community. This will be what it costs. It could be very low cost. It could be very volunteer driven. It's reaching out to other orgs in the Native American Voting Rights Coalition to see what they're doing in their communities. You can go to our website, vote.narf.org, to see what resources are available. There's printed materials that you can just print up and put at your tribal communities in your government offices that can show you and answer some of these questions. What is gerrymandering? What is redistricting? What is the census implication on these representation maps? It's all there, but it takes a little bit of legwork. So we invite tribal leaders, election officials in their departments to reach out to us and figure out what we can do to help them identify those challenges and then find some solutions.
OJ, want to add to it?
Yeah, well, I would actually ask tribes to write a letter requesting that they put an in-person satellite office within the tribal office. That because, when these satellite offices these election offices were created, they were created in the county because that's where the county did their business. That's where they went and got their license, or they fed their horses, or whatever. And what we've been saying is that's what our tribal office is. Our tribal office is that local county office where tribal members go and do their business. And so it's only going to take a letter with one paragraph basically saying we are requesting an in-person satellite office on these days and these hours to be within that tribal office. That they may say no, but you're setting groundwork in order to move on, because this is never going to be over. The other thing I would suggest, and a lot of people don't realize it, but tribes have a right to inform their citizens. Like 501c3s or even C4s, they did what they call a voter card, in which you can identify the good, the bad, and the ugly on both candidates, and then supply that information to the tribal members or the citizens. Tribes can do the same thing, and what it don't have to be a member. Their casinos hire hundreds of thousands of non-Indians that, if the election was to go one way or the other, could affect all of those jobs. Nothing is safe right now. And so tribes also need to put out to their tribal employees, to the casino employees, of what they would like them to support. And because in the end run, it could actually affect the jobs and the money that they get if things were to go wrong.
Thank you so much. And I will add this, that we can't wait till 2 weeks before the election to try to solve some of these issues. So the conversation that here we are in end of April, and it's not too soon to really start talking about how your tribal members can get to the polling stations in November, or even if it's early voting. So, and to our viewers, Chi-miigwech, I want to thank you, OJ and Dallin, and we'll have you back on between now and the election, because I think this is critical that we keep talking about it as issues arise. And next time we will talk about the candidates who are running, who are appealing out there to, especially Native candidates. So thank you both for coming on. And to our viewers, Chi-miigwech, for tuning into another edition of Native Bidaské. Elections are very critical, and you will be hearing more and more about it from Native News Online from now until November. So Chimigwich, tune in again next week. And next week's guest will be a congressional candidate, is former president of the Navajo Nation, Jonathan Ness. And tune in next week and you'll see that. And in the meantime, be safe, and young ones, give your elders a hug and take care of all of Indian country. Chimigwich.
Doksha Wopila.
Thank you.
If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chimigwech.